In this video, I'm going to explain why the number one priority for empaths is to set your boundaries. If you don't have boundaries, you're going to feel more overwhelmed and exhausted and tired than if you had boundaries. And I'll explain in this video how you can cope with that, and so that you'll be more confident and be able to make the decisions faster and go for what you want instead of what you don't want. You'll also enjoy being around other people more and spending time alone. You'll enjoy that more too. There's a lot of different things that can happen with boundaries. A lot of the times that we think about the boundaries that we only set for ourselves, and that's a protective mechanism that we need to do to make sure that we feel safe. And I had an experience with an ex-husband of mine who had a very, very dysfunctional family. They were very enmeshed, and it caused a lot of problems in their relationship. I was able to sustain who I was, and I did have boundaries, but they would just walk right over them. And so I decided that I needed to establish one solid, firm boundary to take care of that. And that was for my husband to support me. And so I made that a huge boundary of mine. And when he didn't support me, that's when I became upset. His family did a lot of different things and said a lot of different things, including lies and bashing you when you left the room. And there was another complication with that, where with my ex-husband, when he was married to his first wife, his mother married her father. So they ended up being stepbrother and sister, which was just total chaos in that family. But a lot of the arguments that my ex-husband and I had were because he didn't support me. And in my opinion, that should be a number one thing. You don't have to agree with your spouse on what's being said or what's being done, but you do need to stand up for them. And that was a huge boundary for me that eventually, caused the demise in our relationship. And another thing that we need to do when we're talking about boundaries is recognize other people's boundaries. I think that sometimes we get so concerned about setting up our boundaries and what's happening with us and how things are going to affect us and other people's emotions and what we need to do about that. And, the story goes on, that we forget to respect other people's boundaries. And that has to do with some of the things that empaths are blessed with and gifted with caring too much. Well, we need to start paying attention to other people's boundaries, and that'll help us with that phenomena that we have of caring too much. And I don't think there's anything that explains caring too much. I really don't know how you could care too much. When you cross the lines into codependency and you start sacrificing yourself for the other person, that's where the boundaries come in, and you really need to be firm with those boundaries that you set up. One of the boundaries that I had to set up was on social media. That was a really strong one for me, because when I started looking up, years ago, when I started looking up empaths, and I was one of the people that says, oh my gosh, that explains a lot. That completely describes me in a lot of ways. But then I started realizing how depressing some things are on the internet when it comes to empaths, and what is spread across the internet about empaths. My daughter has cystic fibrosis, and when I tell people that, the response that I usually get is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry that she has CF. Well, she was born in 1996 and she's 28 years old, and there have been a lot of medical technology and a lot of really great things since she was born. When she was born, I was told that the average lifespan was 19. And now the average lifespan is up into like 55 or 60 years old. But it's just a perception that people have. Say, if you say you're an empath, what kind of response do you get from people? Do you get yes, that's awesome, that's great, you're able to do the most awesome things? Or do you get this sadness with, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. So I went online and I looked up a few things that were signs of being empath. I want to share a couple with you. You have a difficult time with romantic relationships. You need a lot of alone time. You need to be alone to feel calm. You have a hard time moving from relationship to relationship. You experience sympathetic nausea. I'm not quite sure what that is. You are sensitive to strange smells or scratchy socks. That was a good one. You cry during diaper commercials. Sometimes you experience overwhelm and a lot of emotions when you're in public. The tragic or violent events on TV can completely incapacitate you. And you might feel people's physical illnesses, not just their emotions. And empaths are target for energy vampires. And you may struggle with boundaries. You experience mood swings and may be unpredictable and needy. Well, as I was going through these things and the signs of being an empath, and there are good ones also, but I started feeling kind of depressed. I was like, oh my gosh, this doesn't sound like, very much fun. They don't make it sound fun at all to be an empath. So if you're not depressed yet, let me go on here. You're prone to illness and physical pain. You feel constant fatigue. You have a tendency towards addictive behavior. You become an emotional sponge if not careful and absorb the negativity or toxic shame that's not yours. Compassion can feel like a burden. Others' emotions can flip you like a switch. You struggle with anxiety and depression. Small things can deeply upset you. Saying no is really hard. You don't always know which emotions are yours. And then one of the things on a website called The Conversation says an excess of empathy can be bad for your mental health. And so if you're on the websites and you're looking up all this information, it can get depressing after a while. I started thinking, oh my gosh, what is it? They make it sound like a disease or something like that. And so I went a little bit further and I looked up some titles of some websites. How to Stop the Suffering. Empath Overwhelm. What is it and how do I overcome it? How to Cope with Being an Empath. Empath Fatigue, how it takes a toll on you. And the one I like the best is an Empath's Survival Guide. And as I was going through these and looking at all this stuff on the internet, I thought, oh my gosh, no wonder people have such a hard time. You get labeled, the label is one thing, and you get labeled as an empath, and all of a sudden you have all these problems. We can go deeper, into trauma and why empaths are empaths, but I would like to go forward. I'm an up until now person. What do we do about this now, and how can we go forward with it? Another thing about the empaths that I read was, it's like empaths need to learn to say no. They need to set up their boundaries and they need to learn to say no. But I want to kind of flip that around and say, we need to say yes to ourselves, not necessarily say no to someone else. We need to start saying yes to ourselves and flip that around. And I think it'd be a little bit easier to set boundaries that way. I think with the internet and a lot of the social media, you can really resonate with a lot of the things that we're saying. And like I said, oh my gosh, that sounds like me. That sounds exactly what I'm going through. But don't focus it on too much, because when we start believing everything that we're reading or we're seeing, then it's going to make even more difficult. It's just like when children, and the parents are, constantly tell their children, and maybe this is how some people become empaths, but what terrible children they are, and children start believing that. That's the same thing about searching on the internet about empaths. I found a lot of good things and a lot of the gifts that empaths have. And a lot of it was the same. There was some repetition. But one of the things that I noticed was how negative it was, to be an empath. And I don't think that that's true. I think there's a lot of different things that we can work on in a lot of different ways, but I think establishing boundaries is the number one thing. Like I said, if you can set up your boundaries, and it may not be directly with a person, it might be a side person. Even if you're out with your friends and you have your boundaries with other people wherever you are, and somebody crosses that boundary, there's nothing to say that your friends or whoever you're with can't support you with that. You know, you guys are going to know if you're friends with someone and you're close enough, you're going to recognize that your friend is struggling, and you should jump in there and help them out. Because it is hard to set boundaries, and it is hard to stick to boundaries, and it comes to practice, practice, practice. And so once we can get that all lined up, and you can figure out how much more confident you can be and how much easier decisions you're going to make based on what the boundaries that you have, then life is going to be a lot easier, and you'll be able to work on the things that are important to you without thinking that the world is out to get you. So if you like the content of this video and you'd like to see more, you know what to do, and we'll catch you next time.